Welcome back to Think Deeper. I'm your host, Jack Wilkie, joined by my co-hosts, Will Harrop and Joe Wilkie once again. It is Monday, October 31st. We had a lot of folks listen to last week's episode on Halloween, and so I'm not going to wish you a happy Halloween, but I am going to ask Joe, what are you going as tonight?
I'm going as myself, which is a Christian,
Okay.
a very strong Christian. So I don't know. I don't think you can go as that, but yeah. Well,
So no
what are you going as?
M&Ms or Reese's cups in your future, then, Joe? Huh?
Tomorrow, the candy's cheap.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
The
yeah.
principles.
The candy's cheap.
That's right. The principles
That's right.
vanish tomorrow
for my harvest party.
The candy that is the candy that is satanic today. Tomorrow is baptized back into
Meat sacrifice to idols, candy sacrifice to idols. It's
Yeah.
all,
All right, that's it.
You know
There
how
we
it
go.
is. Yeah.
Okay, and we just had to rib you on that one more time. But we loved the discussion. There were a lot of YouTube comments, some Facebook feedback as well. We're not trying to be controversial, but we want to talk about what matters to people, and especially one where we disagree among ourselves. I think was a lot of fun, a lot of good points made both ways. It's a difficult thing, but we want to handle the real world things that affect our Christian lives, and so. Joe, I guess, going as the holier than thou pious Christian, Will and I going as heretics in Joe's rendering. But yeah, we want to thank everyone who listened, who passed it on, who commented, reached out, and yeah, again, just a really fun episode that we enjoyed doing. Let's get into this week's talk.
So for our topic this week, we always try to, get a feel, get our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the culture. Obviously, with our Halloween episode last week, and then we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, what is it that people are caring about, especially with the seasons and the things that are going on, and as far as that goes. And so that's exactly what we wanted to do with this episode. Is we've got a very important day coming up. November 8th is Election Day. That's on a lot of people's minds. You're going to be hitting the voting booths, and so we felt it would be appropriate to devote an entire episode to kind of this idea of voting, this idea of Christians and politics. And we've done some episodes kind of, loosely based on this idea. We had a Christian nationalism episode all the way back, I believe it was in February or March, back when we were first getting going this year. So I encourage you to go back and listen to that one. July 4th, we did a shorter episode kind of centered around patriotism, but we haven't really devoted a full episode to, again, the question of voting for Christians. How involved should Christians be in politics? And again, with November 8th coming up, again, a lot of you will be hitting the voting booths on that Tuesday. We felt it was appropriate to devote a whole episode to this, and we really believe that this is one of those topics that matters a great deal. There's a lot at stake here. So guys, as we get going into this, we've got several areas we want to hit. Before we hit those, why is this so important? Why is this something that we believe Christians should believe in and should care about, versus something that we can just brush aside and say, you know what, that really doesn't matter? What's at stake here?
Yeah, we did a worldview episode a month or two ago about really bringing everything in your life under the lordship of Christ, and that there's not any area in which you should just go about it and think, well, I can handle this the way that I want, the way I prefer, the way I think would be best, and so to bring Christ into it. But the other pitfall that I think sometimes we fall into is giving into cultural pressure, or giving into what we've always done, or way we want things to be, and then finding verses to kind of support that view, why it would be okay to support certain things, or this versus that. And so with a lot of these debates, the Bible comes into it, but on the back end rather than at the front end, rather than starting at where we should go with it. And I think there's some bad ideas out there. Some of them I've held myself and grown out of, I guess. And there's, as you got at, there's just so much at stake. And I know every few years it's, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And in a sense, it's true that every succeeding one, every new one is that most important, because you look how much cultural slide there is, how much more is put on the table, how much more of life is politicized. I mean, you would think going to the bathroom is not political in any sense. Now it is, because of male, female, the gender stuff like that. I remember when I started at Focus Press 10 plus years ago, it was gay marriage was all the rage. Now we don't even debate that anymore. And so, like how far that Overton window has shifted and how much is on the table and gets added to the table every 2 years, every 4 years. And then you see how these things matter in real life. You see how these ideas play out. You see the dire consequences that occur. We see something like Roe v. Wade being overturned, and that's really exciting. But then we see some really bad things happening, and so you see what happens when what the results are of these things. And I think it's very tempting for Christians to be Gnostic about this stuff and to say, well, we're not of this world. And I guess that'll get us into our first point that we want to address is that idea that.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I was just saying.
I don't want to launch us in, and if you guys had anything more to say before we get started.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say on that note, we're recording this. What is it? 3 days after Joe Biden brought in this transgender TikTok star that I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name. You can look it up. Dylan Mulvaney. I just said I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I think it's Dylan Mulvaney, and he basically got on there and said that he doesn't believe states should have the right to ban any kind of transgender surgeries. I mean, this is the world we're living in. This is now the society. This is the society that our kids are going to be growing up in, where performing transgender surgeries on minors, performing transgender surgeries on kids is something that is, 20 years ago, nobody would have ever thought that would even be thought of. Now it's a real debate for a lot of people. And so this is, like you said, Jack, like you brought up with the Roe v. Wade stuff, it matters. These are things that are important. These are things that I've got a 11-month-old. He's about to be a full year old. What kind of world is he going to be growing up in? What kind of world are his kids going to be growing up in? My grandkids. And so as we've talked about before, that's why this type of stuff matters. We can't live in an individualistic, well, I'm not going to have to worry about that here in 50 years because I won't be here anymore. Yeah, but your kids will. Your grandkids will. And that's why this is such a big deal.
When I kind of lost faith in the voting system itself, that, well, it's not going to fix anything, right? Elections are either rigged or kind of going to go their way or whatever it is, or it just doesn't make that big of a difference. But the reality is the men and women that have been elected are the ones that are very much pushing these decisions. And so, yes, it does matter. And from a political standpoint, of course, we are a podcast. We're not pushing one way or the other party-wise per se, but we'll be very upfront. There is clearly a difference, specifically in terms of who is attempting to do God's will and who isn't. But this does lead us, I think, into where you were going with it, Jack, of kind of a lot of Christians, I think, are either they've lost faith in the political system or they just kind of feel like we don't really need it, right? Our citizenship is in heaven. We go to, let me pull it up real fast. We had John 18:36, which, again, I believe is Jesus, but without looking at it, I believe is Jesus talking to Pilate.
That's where he says, "My soul, or my people, or my
there you go. My kingdom is not of this world." Yeah, I didn't want to misquote it here. He says, "Yeah, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." And so it's very easy to have this for Christians to look at it that way and to look at America and say, well, we're not part of the American kingdom, so to speak. We're part of God's kingdom, and so politics don't really matter, or even the election isn't that important because ultimately our citizenship is in heaven and not here in America. And so for us to really throw our political weight around, that's not what God is. That's not what He is requiring of us because our citizenship isn't here. So
it's kind of Sorry, I was going to say, it's kind of what Jack brought up, I think, on the July 4th episode. It's kind of the "this world is not my home" mentality.
Yes, right? Bingo. There you go. Perfect. And so I wanted to throw to you, what is your answer to that? We talked about it some, yes, back on the July 4th. I'm going to assume not everybody listening to this has listened to that. I would encourage everybody to go check it out for sure, to go back and listen to some of the older ones that we've recorded, especially that one, get some more context on this. But what are your thoughts to that specific point of, hey, John 18:36, our world really isn't of, or our citizenship isn't of this world, isn't of America per se, it's of heaven, and so why should we really participate in the voting process and be more politically minded?
So I think the first thing you have to do is put that in context and understand it as it means. When he says, my kingdom is not of this world, He means it's not of the character of this world. It doesn't originate from the same places. That doesn't mean it's not in this world. That he has no interest in the kingdom of this world, because what really annoys me about this kind of talk is it pretends the resurrection didn't happen. It pretends that the Great Commission didn't happen. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And then you extrapolate that, you follow that to Romans 13, where it says governments are a minister to God for his good, for good. 1 Peter 2 adds that they're to reward the good, they're to punish the evil. That he's holding them accountable. Jesus is ruling over the White House. He's ruling over British Parliament. He's ruling over the Kremlin, whatever they call the Russian seat of power anymore. I guess they still do.
Sounds right.
Ruling over Ukraine, ruling over India, every country, and Psalm 2 gets into that of Jesus is that power exchange that Jesus submitted himself. The Father is glorifying him as King over all things, and if they don't pay homage to the Son, if they don't kiss the Son, if they don't bow before Jesus, they'll be crushed. And so, my kingdom's not of this world. We'll throw that out there like Jesus doesn't care about the things of this world. He really does. And they'll also point to where Satan offered him the kingdoms of this world, said, bow to me and all of this will be yours. That was a matter of delayed gratification. Jesus gets all those things in the end because, again, all authority has been given to me. I rule over the whole world is what he's saying. And so it wasn't that Jesus said, I have no interest in the world. It was, I'm not going to sell my soul to Satan to get this power. And so getting that kingdom is not of this world thing right is very important, because I think it's one of those that like people think is a mic drop. Oh, he said his kingdom's of not of this world, so we shouldn't care about this stuff. There's just too many verses that go to the opposite, and then we get into, I talk about this all the time, the scripture wars. Well, I dropped this one, so the verse you have doesn't count. We got to figure out how all of these fit together, and there's no way you can take all those other verses and make that mean that Jesus doesn't care about what happens in America.
Okay, I want to take a quick second and discuss a theological thing. So is this to say that Jesus did not have all power? At what point does he lose all power when he takes on the form of man, coming in the form of a baby? Or is that to say God did not have all power over the kingdom? Of course he does. But at what point, resurrection is when he's given all power. It seems Satan does have all power. So was it for 33 years that Satan had all power? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Satan didn't have all power, because in that same conversation with Caesar, Jesus says, I'm here because I'm letting this happen.
Sure.
I could get out of this, but Jesus...
But how does Satan offer something that is not his?
Well, that's the Philippians 2 thing. Well, I mean, the world tells, the Bible tells the whole world is under the power of the evil one, and so Satan has tremendous power, but Jesus conquered, and that's the Philippians 2 thing of Jesus emptying himself, going to the cross as a bondservant, being put to death, and it's at that every knee will bow, and all authority is given to him, and so it is his way of conquering Satan is going through that. But as far as like who had the greater power, well, we see that there. Satan couldn't force him to do that.
Sure.
Jesus had again, could have called 72,000 angels, could have called the legions of angels. He had the power to get himself out of that and to destroy the world. But, again, the love of God bound him, all of those other things. It's an interesting question. But I don't think it meant he was subservient to Satan at that point.
Right, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he's given a name above all names and given all rule and authority, Great Commission. Does that mean he didn't have... How are you given something you already had? Like, at what point was he given that? Only after the resurrection was Jesus given all rule and power and authority? Because, and that's my question, and I know this is against, so I apologize, this is not a political, but it's an interesting discussion on the theology end of it, of like, did Jesus lose all rule, power, and authority when he emptied himself, Philippians 2, coming in the form of a bondservant? Like, was that the point at which he lost all of that? So for 33 years he didn't have it, but then after the 33 years he did have it? Like, I don't know.
He's still fully God, but yet
right.
This is the deep end of the theology pool that we might have to do another episode on.
It's an interesting question, though. Yeah.
It is. It very much is. And the point being, the things that he had to give up to become one of us.
Right.
So that he could relate to us in all things tempted as we are. All those Hebrew scriptures about being our high priest. And so he didn't just come here and coast through on easy mode. I had to go through everything we did. But,
I'm actually going to say, let's save this before you answer that, because I got some ideas as well, and so we're going to tease everybody a little bit on that and just say, hey, this is something that we're going to get back around to, because I do think it bears out more study. I have some thoughts. I'm sure, Will, you got some thoughts, Jack as well. I don't want to take too far, because I'm realizing, because I'm like, I got this question.
You also want to make sure not to like confess any early church heresies, which is very easy on this.
I was going to say that's very that can happen very quickly, and I don't want to do that either. Let's devote a full episode, because again, yeah, go ahead and jump in.
I was just going to get us back to the voting thing, because I still
Sure.
didn't answer that question. I've got two thoughts on, well, I guess the kingdom is not of this world thing. How many times do we read throughout the Bible the concept of God's people doing everything they can to further justice, right? To defend the fatherless, to defend the widow's cause, basically to push good and try to stop evil. That's what God desires of his people. And for somebody to drop our king, or his kingdom isn't of this world, so we just need to kind of stay out of everything. I'm curious as to, because I know you guys obviously don't buy into that, but I'm curious how they would defend that position of, again, the Roe v. Wade stuff, the using legal means to fight this drag queen story hour stuff. If you're kind of in the anti-voting camp, what would your answer be to that? Listen, God expects us to do everything we can to stop evil. God expects us to do everything that we can to pursue justice, to further righteousness. And if getting in the voting booth to say, look, we don't believe that drag queens should be reading books to pre-K students, if that's a way to do it, I don't see how somebody who would be of the opinion that, my kingdom is not of this world, or Jesus' kingdom isn't of this world, so therefore we just need to stay out of it. What's their answer to that? And I've got one other thought, but I'll let one of you guys play devil's advocate on that if you want for just a second, because to me, that's something God expects of his people, is to do everything we can to stop drag queens from reading books to kindergartners, just to do everything that we can to put an end to babies being murdered in the womb. Right. So what do you guys have to say to that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things people get into with this kingdom's not of this world is that, the church was not made to rule over the kingdoms. No, it wasn't, but it was made to instruct them. Because, again, Romans 13 is that they're to punish the evil, and those verses are brought up, punish the evil, reward the good. Well, you've got standards in there, evil and good. Well, what's evil and good? That's what we're debating right now. Are drag queens good, or are whole moral families good? It's one or the other. They got to pick one or the other. And so the job of Christians is to stand up and say, this is the right one. And in a country where the authority has been delegated to some degree, that is where you're helping inform the government of, say, this is right and good. And if you don't do this according to God's word, you're going to be punished for it. There's going to be a problem. I mean, you think about Moses standing before Pharaoh. You think about Daniel before Nebuchadnezzar and having to tell them some pretty difficult messages of, hey, man, you're in the wrong, and there's going to be a problem. And that is a degree to which that's the church's job in the kingdoms of this world. And it's that thing, there's a naivety, number one, of thinking we can just stay out of this stuff and do our work. But you're bringing up a lot of the social justice stuff, and the Christians who are very much into that kind of thing, which we've talked a little bit about, a critical race theory episode and such. They will be the ones that will say, well, we shouldn't be political. Well, that's political. Everything's political now, okay? Right. And everyone has political stances on things. As I said, bathrooms are political. Whether or not your 4 or 5-year-old can choose their gender, that's political. Joe is a therapist. There's states in which if somebody comes to him and says, I'm trans, I'm dealing with that, and I don't want to be, he could be legally prosecuted for doing that.
Most states.
Yeah, most states. I mean, this is... how you can't get out of this. And then you look at Canada, preachers being arrested for trying to keep their church open last year. It's coming for you whether you know it or whether you acknowledge it or not. Your life is being politicized. And so you say, well, we'll stay out of the political. Show me something anymore that's not political. Sports
right, good luck,
are political.
Basically.
Music is political.
Pringles are political.
Movies are political. Yeah. Oreos, their rainbow packaging.
Netflix.
Walk through the grocery store in June and tell me that you can find anything that's not politicized. And so, we just got to stay out of politics. You literally can't. And so then the question is, how do we do it right?
And I think that's going to get us into our next point of how do we do it right, because that's an important point. But something I was thinking about is, we talk about loving one another and loving the brethren and loving, all people. Romans 13 makes it very clear that God established government for a very specific reason, right? To uphold the good and to punish evil. And when they're not doing it, the same way that I think a father will be judged, a husband will be judged, elders will be judged, right? They're worthy of double honor when they do it well, but they'll also be judged more harshly. The government will be judged, and I think specifically our current government will be judged very harshly in the eyes of God for them upholding evil and punishing good, going exactly against God's plan. So if when you go to the polling booth and you're about to vote, if you think about, I'm trying to get the person that is going to be least judged by God in there, somebody that's actually going to do God's will, which is uphold good and to punish evil. Like, that's our duty, I think, even in terms of a loving duty from Christians, is to make sure that the man who is going to be more favorable in God's eyes, yes, we're praying for them to come to the knowledge of the truth for sure, but they're going to be more favorable in God's eyes and less judged by doing the right thing. And so I think that also shifts the perspective of, like, you're actually loving people when you're voting correctly. You're helping them not let the wrath of God be poured out on them the way that I think our current government will be, based on the things they're doing. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, why us getting involved is very good.
And I've got one other thought on that, and you guys can, kind of put me back in my lane if this doesn't really apply here. But is there not an element to, we've talked a lot before about the dominion mandate, right? About the fact that God gave humans dominion over the earth, over the animals, that kind of thing. And, you hear all the time this phrase, this concept of we got to be good stewards of what God's given us. Does that play into this at all, of the fact that, look, if we just take I'm just going to stay completely out of it approach, and again, kind of inadvertently allow all these things to happen, could an argument be made we are being poor stewards of what God has given us, and by not participating in, again, doing everything that we can to stop all this stuff, the drag queen story hour, everything we've mentioned? Does the stewardship come into that at all?
The question really is, because I want to paint it from the other side, because I think, Joe and I have both evolved on this, and I've been a little bit on the other side, is if you really feel, our citizenship is totally otherworldly, totally not of this world, then you don't feel that responsibility. It's like, what's that old saying, not my circus, not my monkeys, and you see all this bad going on, but as you say, this dominion mandate, but also the Great Commission, and we got into that, disciple the nations versus make disciples of all nations, and very interesting etymology there. But this is one of those things, again, where Christians believe it, but then when it comes to, like, the political side, they make an exception, right? And when Christians, I saw an N.T. Wright quote, a Facebook friend shared the other day. Man, don't listen to N.T. Wright. Man, goodness, he's a disaster. Anyway, he had this quote about basically Christians, the way we change the world isn't through political means. It's by establishing hospitals and by serving the poor and by doing all these things. Like, yeah, absolutely, it's those things. But now you're saying, you've got a contradiction here of, like, are we citizens of this world and supposed to make the world a better place or not?
Right.
And if we are, this is one of the means of it. And
right, by any means necessary,
yeah, and when you view government as a total evil that's totally irredeemable, well, it's like, no, we're bringing everything in the world under the rule of Christ. And again, kings are supposed to submit to him. And so I think people, I guess this will get us into one of our other points, they think that what we're trying to do is force everybody to be Christian, a gunpoint conversion kind of thing. If the government's Christian and you get this Christian nation, you're going to force everybody to be Christian. No, it's not. It's trying to get the government and trying to lead this along to a way where they encourage Christian morality, Christian values. Right. That evil and good that they're basing their punishments on. Which is what
God wants.
Right, that evil and good that he's expecting them to rule on. We're giving them, here's the standard for that.
Right.
And it's not the law of Moses, directly applied. It's not theocracy or theonomy. I mean, to a degree, everything's theonomy. I think that's the other thing we have to hit here is everything's theonomy. There's no neutrality.
Yeah, define that. Define theonomy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, theonomy is theo, God, nomos, law. The law of God. And it's not taking the law of Moses that says, well, if you eat shrimp, you're dirt, you're unclean, and if we'll stone people to death for these things. But it gives us the right and wrong. And I think let's get into that myth of neutrality real quick on all this, because this is the second point we wanted to get to was Christians and power don't mix. And so the idea is basically leave it neutral. We'll just, we can support our ideas through evangelism and service, but we can't ever use, power to implement our ideas. Like, you're taking for granted 2,000 years of development that everything around you is a reflection of that has already happened.
Right.
It is so historically ignorant to say we can't do that. Because as I've brought up on another episode, if you look at countries around the world where Christianity has not had an influence on the system of law, there's still cannibalism. There's still slavery.
Yeah.
There's still all kinds of awful things. So we're like, ooh, Christians in power, we can't have that. Like, you know what? The fact that we have laws, keeping women from being raped and sold into slavery and stuff like that.
Untouchables.
Yeah, the caste system, things like that. Like really bad stuff that still happens in this world. We don't have that because of the beauty of Christ's law influencing government.
And thank God.
Yeah, thank God for that. And so then you say, well, we need this neutrality. We won't enforce our laws, and they won't enforce. Every society is religious. Every society has.
There's no such thing as neutral, right?
There's no such thing as neutral. It's the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of Satan, and you're choosing one or the other. And it's like, man, you look at Drag Queen Story Hour. It's pretty clear which one they're choosing right now.
You're either running toward one or you're running toward the other, and we clearly are running toward the other. And I think in running toward Christ, like there's this idea, well, Christ already reigns over all. He already rules over all. So basically, why would we need to? And it's like, well, that's basically saying, why would we need to evangelize? Christ rules over all. It still has to be done.
Yeah.
It's bringing it to bear.
Yeah, you still have to bring it to bear. Like, Christ has given us a law of freedom, of course, but, given us a law, given us rules to follow, given us things that are intended to make the nations. Because I was thinking as you were talking, okay, are we supposed to have Christian fathers? There's 4 systems of power, a power structure, hierarchy, right?
This sounds interesting. Tell me about that.
I was going to say, yeah.
No,
Jack
we did the episode on this, the submission one. For the fuller discussion.
And Jack was just speaking on this yesterday at a congregation in Georgia that I was privileged to be able to attend, and so just listening to
so
this.
you
but it was
stole
on
all
my
this
mind
from Jack, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Everyone
Most of
good
my
ideas, really.
I was going to say most of my ideas, but he stole his main book from me. So no, just kidding. So really, my main point, I guess, would come back to, as Jack was talking, the 4 levels of hierarchy and power. You have husbands over wives, fathers over their children, elders over the church, and government over the people. Should we have Christian fathers? 1,000%. Should we have Christian husbands? 1,000%. You can't have can't have elders apart from Christianity, right? So of course those 3. Why would we not take that into the 4th and look to have Christians ruling government to the best of their ability? You say, well, nobody's actually a Christian, right? Can we also say, if somebody believes in God, that's better than if they don't? Like, have they repented and confessed and been baptized and are living faithfully in the Church of Christ? Well, no, so basically they're flawed. There's a big difference between a militant atheist and somebody who is generally trying to do the will of God. Can we all agree on that?
Don't get to that point yet. That's a point we want to talk about.
Sure, with the character can't. Sure, sure.
So on this idea of Christians in power that don't mix, and I have a friend who makes this point. He brings up Jesus saying that the rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them, but it's not this way among you. The greatest of you should be your servant. And that's a great verse. But what he's taking that to mean is they rule, and therefore ruling is wrong. No, it's saying a style of ruling is wrong. Self-aggrandizement, stomping on people under you to pat yourself on the back, because that's what the disciples are trying to do when Jesus says that. I want to be the greatest. I want to be the greatest. He says, you want to be the greatest, you need to serve. But look at that. All of those men became elders. They were apostles. They were leaders of the church. They ruled in a sense, right? And so Jesus is not outlawing rulership. He's outlawing a certain way of rulership. He's saying this is wrong. As Christians, we don't do this. But you look at a Joseph, you look at a Daniel, you look at a David, and the kings that did well by serving the people. They were not sinning by ruling over the people. When they served the people and did right by the people and led the people in the ways of God, they were good rulers. There's always rulers. I think I've said this a few times, that's what I really learned over the 2 years of COVID was you're always going to have elites. Pareto, he's a political philosopher. This is his principle, that there's always elites. You need good elites. You need a circulation of elites. You need elites that care about the people. And so this idea that, rulership is bad and evil. No, rulership is something God baked into creation. Leadership, elites, people that are shepherds of the people. And
hierarchy in general. Yeah.
Hierarchy in general. And it can be done well, and it can be done poorly, and it needs to be done well, and so the idea that Christians just have no part in this, have no power in this world, it's not true. And again, it takes for granted all of the Christians who have come to power and reformed. William Wilberforce, the great story of the efforts to outlaw slavery. Aren't we thankful for that? Isn't it
Right.
good that a Christian rose up with Christian biblical convictions and did that? Why would we say that's a bad thing?
Well, I think so much of this too, and Jack, you were kind of hitting on this, is rooted in the fact that we don't like hierarchy in any of those areas that Joe brought up. We want everything to be equal, right? We don't necessarily like to, people don't really preach about the headship of the husband and the wife being under that because, that's a touchy subject. Why? Because we bristle at this idea of hierarchy. Same thing, when you're talking about government here, it's just this general disdain for a power structure, this general disdain for having somebody place in authority over you, and because again, we want everything to be equal. And so I think that's something that plays into this kind of, Christians and power shouldn't mix. I always go back to, so you're telling me that the world and our society would not be a better place if the people in government were not Christians. That's what you're telling. That's what a lot of people seem to want to say, is that, we really shouldn't delve into that. And it's like, can you imagine if 60% of the government was trying to do the will of God, 70%, 80%?
Right.
Could that possibly, could not the world be a better place? Could not American society be functioning in a much better way?
Well, and the implication that, like, the worst case scenario is that Joe Biden would repent and say, you know what, we're getting rid of this trans stuff. I'm not going to push the abortion thing anymore. This is wrong. I'm sorry. I've been misleading the people. Like if that happened, something went wrong. Christians in power. Like, really? You're supposed to be praying.
Right.
Yeah, 1 Timothy 2, praying for rulers and all of authority. They would let us lead these tranquil and quiet lives. Well, right now we can't live tranquil and quiet lives. We're having to talk about all this stuff. We're having our lives politicized down to the very nth degree that we have to do every single day politics. We have to just, on all of these fronts. And so this Christians in power don't mix thing, nobody's advocating that we, put people to conversion at gunpoint. Right. Nobody's advocating we stage a coup and take over the government and make everybody be Christians. No, we're advocating that the people that rule over us would look at the laws of God. Because one of the other things that is taken for granted and is totally misunderstood, there's a world of difference between a pagan Rome that is just now hearing the gospel and an American government that has hundreds of years of history knowing the gospel and turning away from it. Right. And so, it's very important to realize that America is not Israel. We're not a chosen special nation of God. We don't have that favor that they had, but there is that parallel in that they were people that had the law and turned away from it. And they would do well when they repented and turned back, and when they had leaders that repented and turned back. And when they didn't and they went the other way, they would fail. And we see that cycle over and over. We see the good rulers, we see the bad rulers, we see the people repent, we see the people turn away. And so in that sense, we are much more comparable to Israel than we are to Rome, because Rome is just now hearing about this, and it took hundreds of years for Rome to figure it out. Whereas a lot of this Christian political theory is perpetually stuck on Rome. We're not in Rome. We're in a country that knew better and has turned away, and that there's a stricter judgment for that. And it's a whole different approach that we're talking about, and trying to reverse course and turn it back to Christ is King. That's a really important thing. And so that's this Christians in power don't mix is kind of our second thing we wanted to address. Go ahead, Will.
Joe, I'll let you get in here in a second, but that also speaks to the aspect that we brought up before, that we are no longer living in a society that's neutral to the idea of Christianity. We're living in a society that is actively spitting in the face of Christianity. Like you said, right. It's not an ignorance thing. It's no, we've heard it. We are going to choose to completely reject it. Again, kind of spit in its face. And we have a lot of people that still think that we can just be neutral and that, again, society and government can be neutral on Christianity. There is no neutral, as we've already discussed. We live in a society that is actively doing everything that they can to further the work of Satan and to silence Christianity. Joe, I think you had something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if it's okay to pray for them, and we're told to, 1 Timothy 2, right? If we're supposed to pray for all those who are in authority over us, specifically the government, that we may lead tranquil and quiet lives, doesn't it follow that if you are given the ability to affect some of that change and to vote for those people, you ought to? We want Christians in power. We are praying that they might allow us, that they might rule well, that they might fulfill what God has in store for government, what God has in mind for government in Romans 13. If we're praying for that to come about, maybe we should vote for that to come about as well. And so I want to allow that to kind of transition us into this third point, and that would be the character. I had already alluded a little bit of this, Jack, and you would, which is good because I think I could have gone off on some of that. And that's the character of candidates. So as we're talking about it, is our citizenship in heaven, just to follow our outline, our citizenship ultimately, yes, as Christians is in heaven, but we live on earth, and I think it's okay for us to, have that, to kind of take dominion and to be part of America and to try to enact change. Christians and powers don't mix. That's a farce. They do. There is but power and elites, and God is overall, but He can enact that through us. And so we come to this third point, which is the character of the candidates. And so I want to tee one of you off, either one, concerning this idea of like what you'll hear from people. Well, they're all bad, right? They're all bad, and so who should we vote for? And I've heard some people say vote the man. So there's two different sides to this. I've heard some people say, well, I vote the man. And so they will vote a specific party that is clearly, problematic. But because he's a good guy, I met him, he's been at my local grocery store and just seems like a good guy. And so they either say vote the man and they don't ever worry about what backs him up. Or they say, well, they're all bad. They're all sinners. Nobody's a Christian. Therefore, we really shouldn't vote for them. What are your thoughts on that?
So the Trump-Clinton election in 2016 was the first election that I was really kind of plugged into. I was 16 years old. I couldn't vote, obviously, but I was on social media at that point. I was really kind of plugged into, what people were saying, kind of the stance on each one. And this is where you heard a lot of that, right? It's are you really going to vote for Clinton and with her, all the stuff she did with Benghazi, the email scandal? And then on the other side, it was, are you really going to vote for the awful person that Trump is? I mean, just look at his personal life, right?
Right.
And so then you kind of have which one is the lesser of two evils stance? And so my question is, are you not always going to have a lesser of two evils? By that I mean, is not all of this subjective to some extent, right? When you talk about, you got two candidates up there, for any election year, there's always going to be one who, again, you look at their platforms, you look at the things that they're going to push for if they get elected. There's always going to be one that is more in line with God's will and one that is less aligned with God's will. You're never going to get to, that's why there's two parties, right? You're never going to get two ones that are basically in agreement on everything. And so there is a subjectivity to this that, again, no matter if you had me and Jack up there, obviously, we both firmly believe we're in line with God's word, God's will, but there's still going to be some subjectivity to it, and people are going to say, well, that Will guy, man, I'm just, there's Jack is the lesser of two evils there, so we'll go with him.
I'd agree.
So,
Strongly
right, exactly.
disagree. Will, you got my vote.
So to me, this is something you never get away from, right? Even if you have the two quote unquote perfect candidates, we're all flawed, right? So Jack, I'll jump to you next. What is your answer to this? Because again, the Trump-Clinton election is where I heard this the most. You've been been invested in politics a whole lot longer than I have. What have you seen?
Yeah, it's come back around with the Georgia Senate election. You've got Warnock, the Democrat, and he's a pretty far left Democrat on abortion, things like that. Mm-hmm. And Herschel Walker, the former football player, and he's kind of doing the God and country thing, but then stuff came out about his past. He was a horrible husband and father. I think paid for a girlfriend's abortion, something like that. I mean, just abominable character. And so, there's this thought of, okay, well, Christians, you can't support this, that, and as you said, Trump. And I remember John Piper had an article go viral in the Trump-Biden election where he said, well, look, Biden supports abortion, supports LGBT stuff, supports, bad economics, supports, basically there's nothing on his platform that's Christian at all, but Trump is a very prideful, arrogant man with a sexual past that is obviously very questionable. And he's, some people will make the thing, well, we're not electing an elder of the church, we're electing a president. And on the one hand, like, character does matter. It's not to say that it doesn't matter, but on the other hand, I think it's important, and people will also say, well, what about our Christian witness? Siding with a bad person. Nebuchadnezzar was a bad person. He still did some good things. He did the right thing sometimes. There's a history of that really throughout history. The role of government, and you go to the Romans 13 thing, it doesn't really talk about the personal character of government. It talks about their role in the good and the evil and supporting those things. And when that's the false equivalency of the Piper article. I know, I guarantee we've got some Trump fan listeners. and you see those memes on Facebook of, oh, Trump was this man that was sent by God, or the thing with like Jesus over the shoulder of Trump in the Oval Office. No, this is not a good person on a moral. You can't say that. On the other hand, we had Roe v. Wade overturned because of him.
Right.
Okay, like strictly because of him. If he had lost that election to Clinton, we'd still have it. Not only would we still have it, we would have it locked in for all of eternity. Like we would never have a chance to end it. And so that is a really important point, number one. And that's the problem with the Piper article. You're equating one man's personal character with another man's policies. They both have questionable personal character. I mean, there's stuff about Biden, not a good person. Okay, and so you have that, and you've got two very bad people. One of them is going to have policies that are going to end Roe v. Wade. That are going to, there's some really good things. There's a bunch of things Trump did that I have problems with. That yeah, as I said, I've evolved in my thinking. I didn't vote in any of the elections up until I haven't in a while. But having said that, that's. Supporting a man's policies is not supporting the man's character. And so this Herschel Walker Warnock one in Georgia, a lot of Christians are saying, look at this man's personal character. It is awful. You can't vote for this man. It is awful. Let's not say that he's a good person. On the other hand, what are the consequences? You vote for him and he supports those policies. You have a bad man putting in good policies, or you have a bad man putting in bad policies. And the other thing about this that's really important is to remember, politics is not evangelism. Politics is not the church. And this isn't situation ethics. It's you are here for the goal of policies. It is about policies. It's about laws. It's about enforcement of laws. It's about these kind of things that structure our society. Do you want more moral, godly leaders? Absolutely. Which it's really funny to me that people will come and attack personal character, and then some of the same people will say, we don't need Christians in power. Like, well, what do you... That's the only people left. And so...
Before...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Joe, I'll let you get in. I guess that's kind of what I was trying to get at a second ago. I might not have communicated it very well. What person is going to be good enough for you to vote for them? Does it have to be a baptized Christian? Well, even that baptized Christian is going to have some things. You know what I mean? Like, at what level is it that you're going to say, okay, now I can vote for that person? Otherwise I'm just going to stay out of it until they get to that. Romney a few years ago, he's a Mormon. A lot of Christians, well, I'm not going to vote for him because he's a Mormon, right? And Romney got all kind of other issues. But the point being, at what level is it that you're finally going to say, okay, now I can confidently choose to vote for that person because I know what their character is? Well, do you really? And at what point are you going to fully know that? And Joe, I'm sorry, you've been trying to...
No, you're good. I was just thinking of Absalom. I don't think Absalom was a good guy, clearly. But what was the problem with Absalom? It's who he listened to. It's his policies. If Absalom...
You talking about Rehoboam?
Talking about Rehoboam?
Sorry, not Absalom. Absalom was a very bad guy. Sorry.
Absalom was a terrible person.
Terrible guy. Yeah, sorry. Rehoboam, my bad.
Absalom's nephew, actually.
What's that?
No, grandnephew. In the family.
Yeah, there you go. It's in the family. Somewhere in the lineage, the family tree. Rehoboam, my bad. I don't think Rehoboam was a great guy. But you know what? If Rehoboam, being backed up by his father's wise counsel, had actually listened to his father's wise counsel, the fact that he wasn't a great guy wouldn't have really mattered. Like, the people still would have loved him, even though I don't think Rehoboam was the pinnacle. He was not a man after God's own heart, like his grandfather. So, what's the problem with him? It comes with all your buddies, right? They come into the house. It's like if you got one bad guy coming into your house, but you got a bunch of people that can kind of whip him into shape. That's one thing. You bring the entire block party into your house where it's, he's backed up by horrible people and they're going to be giving him horrible advice and he's going to end up doing really bad things. Guess what's going to happen? And so he may be a bad man. Who's he backed by? What is pushing? And
well, you're seeing this happen in real time with Liz Cheney among the Republicans, who was, very much an anti-Trump, she didn't like the direction the Republican Party was going. She wanted to be Bush-Cheney era, because family and all that. She's not basically cast out of the party, and in a sense cast herself out, like self-removed of I'm not with you guys anymore. Right. Like, and so, and then Tulsi Gabbard on the other side, saying, I'm going independent. I'm not a Democrat anymore, because if you don't take the whole slate, both sides are like, you're not with us. There's really not a middle anymore. And you've got all these people wanting to hold the middle, and it's kind of that thing where the land is dividing between your feet and you're trying to keep a foot on each side. You're just going to fall in the crevice. And so when to get to the point you're talking about, Joe, it's a great point of, well, I like this person a lot. Okay, well, if they're still associated with all those people, they're going to be expected to do all of the things and support all
There's
the
a ton
things.
of pressure for them to do
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you imagine a Republican who is pro-abortion. There used to be some of those. There's really not anymore. Because if they're Republican on everything else, but they're pro-abortion, they're going to slide with, into the Democrats and then end up just kind of taking all the other things on with them. If there's a Democrat who is anti-abortion or anti-woke or, whatever else, they're told you're not good enough for us, you're not pure enough for us, and so they're shoved to the right, and so you just kind of see this polarization happening, and a lot of people lament that. It's like, you know what, we might as well just be clear about it, because the middle wasn't good for anybody, the middle isn't working for anybody,
Right.
and so to your point of, well, I like this person a lot, but they're, all of their buddies are pro Pride Parade. Okay, well, they're either going to be cast out by those buddies or they're going to conform to those buddies.
Right.
And
And
so
most of them conform, and if they don't, again, you got plenty of Bloomberg, right, was another one that was a Republican, but he didn't agree with any of the Republican things, and so now he's a Democrat, I think. Like, that is a very strong case to be made. Like, that's happened a bunch, and it's even getting more, especially the polarization of the parties. Like, that's getting way more. If you look at JFK and the things that he supported, he'd be a Republican today, like, just without a doubt. But to your point of the Overton window, things have really shifted, and we have to be very careful, especially for our older listeners. I will say this, yes, I'm on the younger end, but we have some older listeners. My grandma, I think, was, a lifelong Democrat, and the things that, but, when, as she kind of went along, it's like, well, I always vote party line, always vote Democrat, because that was the party of the people and JFK, and I mean, she's used to kind of that, and so, is what it is. Well, when she started, as she got older, my dad was discussing, like, well, do you back abortion? No, she's a Catholic, right? No, that's terrible. Well, do you back same-sex marriage? No, that's horrible, right? I don't agree with that. That's wrong. But you're still voting Democrat. It's like, what? Didn't realize that those two things are very
Right.
connected
That's
at this
news
point.
to them. Yeah.
Right, and so check in a little bit before you go to cast your vote. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to do this episode, is like, we want to kind of give people something to think about that's like, pay attention to who you're voting for. And also, I want to bring it down to the smaller level, because it's one thing to vote for president. This is a midterm election, of course, right? We're not voting presidents, but we are voting some pretty important things. Senate, probably, we're not, or Senate.
governors, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Governors and some representatives, some senators. You got some real important elections. We're not telling you to vote Republican. We're not telling you to vote Democrat. We're telling you, please pay attention to who you're voting for all the way up, not just on the lower ones, even for the sheriff and for the people that are going to immediately be in your life. Pay attention to these things, get to know them, be a responsible voter where it's, you understand who you're voting for and what you're voting for. But I will also say, once again, I've seen, we had a great guy back home, Perlmutter. I say great guy because he was nice to everybody and everybody loved him on a personal level. His voting policies were atrocious. So you had a lot of Republicans that voted specifically for him because it's like, he's a really good guy. And that's what I heard, is I'm not dogging him as a person. Like, he'd go shake hands and he'd meet with you and talk to people. Really nice. You're getting everything. And this was on a smaller level. Then it got to the bigger, right, as he went up. But it starts on these smaller levels. So please, as you're thinking about this, and to our point, to the flip side of, well, nobody's a Christian. And Will, you spoke to this, and I was speaking a little bit. They're not New Testament Christians, so we shouldn't vote for them. It's better to have somebody whose policies are leading us toward Christ than not. And
That's the point.
And to your point, Jack, going back to the neutrality, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but like, please realize there's no such thing as neutrality. There's no such thing as, I'm going to vote the guy that's kind of going to stand in the middle and we're going to work across the aisle, and separation of church and state. It's like, that's a farce. That's not, it will happen. It always has happened. This is, the church and state will always be together. Pretty much for history. I mean, that's really how it's gone. And so just be aware of that the guy you're voting in, is he leading us more toward Christ or is he leading us away? Are the policies of his party leading us more toward Christ or away from Christ? I don't care if this guy was your best friend growing up and is an amazing person, even a member of the church. What are the policies that are backing him up, and what is he going to do when he gets in office? Is it going to lead us more toward Christ or away from Christ? And to me, so I think we're establishing voting is important. Being part of America and using what God has given you, the means that God has given you to enact change and to really help drive this more toward Christ is important, but do it responsibly, and think about it in a way that is, yes, our Christianity does have to come out when we step into that polling booth. Are we driven more closer or away?
I'm going to bring in a new segment called Hot Takes with Jack. It's my turn.
Wait a minute now.
Yeah,
Brand new.
Yeah, I'm going to do that one this time. On this character of the candidates thing, on this, I know him. He's one of us or something like that. This is something that, especially in the black Christianity in America, has been an issue. Of the numbers for Obama were off the charts. I mean, of black evangelical black Christians voting for Obama. We had gay marriage established into law, in his term. We have, justices who are atrocious that were established, that are lifelong termers because of him. We have all kinds of bad things. I mean, the White House lit up in rainbow lights because of him. Like, well, yeah, but he cares about our community. Well, hold on. Number one, these policies have not been good for the black or minority communities at all, ever. But number two, voting race over morality, voting race over policy, that's wrong in itself.
It's racist.
Okay, it is. Well, yeah, it's racist in itself, and so like that is really an issue, and that's something that, again, it wasn't just Obama, but just every time black Christians, I believe the majority, overwhelming majority, still vote Democrat. And it's like, well, all of these things, and like Joe was saying about our grandma, she would be horrified by a drag queen story hour. Probably would still be pulling the lever for these politicians, and so it's like, what do you think we're doing here? And it is these policies. So to bring it back to the personal character thing, the Warnock and Walker, Trump, Clinton, Trump, Biden, or whatever, it's bad. It's not good. It is not an endorsement of those people's character, and I think that's something Christians need to be careful about. Is, just because I like this guy's policies does not make him a good person. He's not a hero. He's not any of those things. He's just somebody that is going to accomplish good things politically. Leave it at that. But you also realize, boy, I kept my hands clean and I didn't vote for Walker. I didn't vote for such and such guy. Well, congratulations. Now, because that other guy gets in, they, codify abortion laws nationwide.
Right.
Did you really do something good here? And this goes to, I think, the last one we want to get to with the power, and all of this kind of comes to Psalm 146:3 says, "Don't put your trust in Christians." And I think that's a critique that has been made against
princes.
Yeah, princes. Sorry, don't put your trust in princes. And so
I was like, what version is he using?
Yeah, exactly. Living translation.
Right. Don't put your trust in princes, and that's true. Don't, when people look to man's power, but then some people do the same thing with that they do kingdom not of this world, that they do the rulers of the Gentiles, to basically say, don't expect anything good to come of human leadership. That doesn't hold up scripturally. If your whole thing is, and you see Israel do this. You see times where, Saul himself, like, give us a king. That's going to solve all of our problems. But it didn't get rid of their spiritual issues. So you have to realize this is not a solution for our spiritual issues. The spiritual battlefield is still the spiritual battlefield. But that doesn't mean there's not a political, social, cultural battlefield as well, that there's overlap between the two. And so good leaders are an important thing. That doesn't mean we're putting our trust in princes. We're putting our trust in people that we think will apply Jesus' principles, because our trust is in Jesus.
I think it's the above it all mentality that we are challenging Christians, we're challenging our listeners to take a closer look at. If that's your approach of, Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, and so I'm just going to kind of stay out of it, stay in the background, and going to be kind of above it all. I know a lot of Christians that are like that. Jack, you very much used to be of the, more so into that mindset. I guess, Joe, you as well.
Me too, yeah.
And so that's something, again, that we're challenging people on. If that's your approach, consider what's at stake. I brought up, half an hour ago now, consider the what's at stake when it comes to what world your kids are going to be growing up in and what world your grandkids are going to be growing up in, and the truly the consequences of what it means if we allow these policies, if we allow these people pushing these policies. How often do we hear people belabor how America has gone downhill, right? This country is just going down the drain and all these things. Why do we think that is? It's because we've allowed these policies, we've allowed these people to come into power. And so this is something that, again, we strongly believe is important. We strongly believe November 8th rolls around, get out there and vote. Get out there, do your research. Don't just vote one party. Don't vote one race. Don't vote, because that person's a woman. Good for women getting up in there. Vote for the people that are, once again, not to beat the dead horse, but are going to align us more closely with God's word than less so. That's what's at stake here, and that's what's most important.
And don't be afraid of the Christian nationalism claims of CNN. Matter of fact, if CNN says it and you do the exact opposite, you're probably in
it's probably a good
good
thing,
standing.
right?
Yeah, but there's a lot of fear going around Christian nationalism. They just featured a Doug Wilson, a guy I read, that basically the danger of Christian nationalism and really mixing Christianity and politics. And I think there's a lot of Christians that are like, whoa, we're not that, right? We don't do that. We're not Christian nationalists because that's really bad. And we had the full episode on it. Go back and listen to it again. I'd say that, but to bring it around is kind of like, we're not putting our faith in people at all. Our faith is in Christ, but please don't be afraid of being politically. And as you said, Will, I didn't vote in 2016. I voted for some smaller. I didn't vote for president because I just didn't feel right about it. We're evolving in our views, no doubt. And what I'm realizing, especially COVID changes a lot of things. Jack and I were just having this conversation yesterday. COVID changes a lot of things, and it makes you realize like who's in power very much matters. And even having Trump in power, like the people that were established and the people at the smaller end of things, all the way up from the education system all the way up. Make sure you're voting for all those because they do matter. They do play a role in being scared away from, well, that's Christian nationalist. You betcha. We are Christians who are, wanting Christ to reign overall because the world is a better place when that happens, as Jack alluded to. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there of, CNN and everybody else may try to scare you out of that. No, don't let that be the case. We ought to be a Christian nation. It is good. It was better when we were a Christian nation. Everybody realizes it. You can look at, this is going to sound very, very mean. You can look at the freaks of the world that are, serving you at Chipotle or whatever, and then you can look at the nice Christian family and you go, there's a clear difference here. There's one that everybody is going to feel comfortable with, that everybody is, this is better. And you go, well, that's really mean. Can you really say that? Yes, unequivocally, I can say that.
It's right and wrong.
The Christian family is better. The freak who is tatted up, ear piercings everywhere, doesn't know what gender they are, they're still worthy of God's love. I'm not saying they're not. But when you're pushing that and you're promoting that in this culture politically and you're voting for people that are pushing and promoting that, what you're telling the Christian family is basically, yeah, we prefer the other thing. Come on. It's an easy litmus test.
Well,
do you prefer the freaks or not?
It goes to my point about not everything's evangelism. That person needs to be evangelized. They also don't need to be in any position of power whatsoever.
That's exactly
or encouraged,
or
by
encouraged
the
to do
people
what
who are in
exactly.
power. And this Christian nationalism thing, it's telling that is their thing that they're freaking out about. They're attacking so much. Why would they attack that so much? Because they have another form they want to bring in, an anti-Christian form.
That's right.
And the idea to them that Christians would rise up and say this is how it's supposed to be, that is the scariest thing in the world to them, and so they don't want that at all. That's what they're fighting against. And so, you mentioned COVID, you mentioned everything in the last 2 years. You see everything happening and go, all right, something's got to be done. And I love the point Will made about for your kids. This isn't just for you. I saw a certain rag in our fellowship that publishes articles that it's so bad. I'm not going to name them. Some people are going to know who I'm talking about. And they had a thing about, I think it was an article on gun rights or something like that. And, the guy's article was, didn't take a stance, but the important thing is that we love our neighbor more than we love our rights. That's a false dichotomy. Right. You fight for rights and you fight for good laws and you push for these things because you love your neighbor, because you love your kids, because you, and the opposite of this, the above it all thing is like, I'm going to stay above it all. This doesn't matter. My kingdom's not of this world. Okay, now you've got mixed gender bathrooms. You've got high schools where the kids, the boys go into the girls' locker room and stuff like that. And just the awful things that are coming out of that. And you go, well, I'm above it all. You know what? That's the world. The world is going to be the world. They're going to do those things. Again, the kind of things I used to kind of say, but then you start seeing these applied and you go, well, hold on. Let's recalculate some things. And so you've got that. And then you say, okay, I'll homeschool my kids, or I'll send my kids to well, let me just go down the whole list here. Well, I'll send my kids to the private Christian school. Well, guess what? The private Christian school, the government's not going to let them operate if they discriminate, against LGBT kids, don't let them use the showers and the bathrooms that they want, so they get invaded, or their funding gets taken away, or whatever it is. They lose their tax exempt status, and so that they're hurting. Maybe it closes the school, or maybe they have to capitulate. So you go, I'll homeschool my kids. Well, then they start passing laws of, we're going to invade your homeschool. We want to see what you're doing in your homeschool. We want to apply these things. Oh, you're teaching such and such curriculum. You're abusing your child. We're going to come, we need to review what you're teaching. Maybe even take your kids away. And this is a future that you're like, oh, none of that's happened. Look how far we've come.
Right.
Why would that not happen?
You really don't think that's not going to happen?
There's this guy I was telling Joe about on Twitter. I think he's one of the sharpest political minds of our day. And he says, the side that wants to be left alone will always be defeated by the side that wants to win. And so this thing of, I'll stay above it all, just leave me alone, let me do my thing. They're not going to let you do your thing. This is a religious war that's being fought on multiple fronts, one of them political. If you stay above it all, it's going to cost you and your kids and your grandkids and your neighbors and everybody else. This world matters. This world may not be our home, but it is our Father's world. We do live here. This is real life. We're not Gnostics. You look at the Holocaust, the Holodomor, you look at, just all of the awful things that have happened, and that old quote about good men do nothing.
I don't want my sons and their kids to be put in prison and beaten to death for their Christianity, and that starts with me exercising the rights that I have today. These rights may be taken away in the future. Let's exercise the rights that we have today to use it to make sure that the future remains bright and Christian as much as possible, because the world is a better place. That is us loving our neighbors, and it's me loving my kids and making sure their future is set up. Let's not be above it all. I think, Jack, you stated it great, amazingly, and going off of your point, Will, as well, about the kids. And it's just such a fantastic point of, like, what world are we leaving for our kids? We may be on our way to heaven, and we may be close. Some listeners and such may be close, and you get to escape this horrible world sooner than some of us. But you know what? Not all of us are, there are plenty of people that still have a long life, Lord willing, ahead of them. What are we okay with Drag Queen Story Hour continuing? Are we okay with the world getting worse? Are we okay with persecution of Christians? Let's think about, as we enter into the polling booth and we get ready to pull that lever or fill out, circle the dot, whatever it is, let's be thinking about these principles of really what we want to do. So, Will, I want to kick it back to you. Is there anything else that you have that you want to add before we wrap this episode up? You or Jack?
I think that's a great way to wrap.
I just want to sum up, because we covered a lot of territory. So,
sure,
being above it all, not good. Christians and power don't mix. It's just nonsensical. That his kingdom is not of this world, but it is in this world, and it's part of this world, and it's showing the world a better way. And then so that is our Christian political engagement. And then when you do, it's under his standards. You can't go out and vote for the kind of people, even if, as Joe said, if they don't personally support LGBT mania, if they don't personally support abortion, if they don't doesn't matter. They're going to be with people who pressure them to do so.
And millions will go in their pocket to make sure it happens.
Yeah, you can't support those people. And I think Joe made a good point. Localism. Make sure the people in your town school board, your town's police, your town are going to uphold those right laws. That's going to matter a whole lot more as time goes on. And so I think those are the principles we want to sum up and make sure we leave with here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well stated. As always, we welcome the engagement online when this gets posted. Feel free to comment. Feel free to, obviously, we feel pretty strongly about this. This is not one that, we think there's a whole lot of credence to the other side, but we'd still like to see what you guys have to say, the feedback and that kind of thing. We're also talking, we haven't gotten a rating or a review in quite a while. So if that's something that you guys can spare 90 seconds to go on your podcast app and do, we would greatly appreciate it. That is, of course, if you enjoy listening to the show, which hopefully you do. But we will look forward to joining you all next week for another episode of Think Deeper.